Thưa quý vị và các bạn, Making Peace with Việt Nam hay Hòa giải với Việt Nam là một bộ phim tài liệu của đạo diễn, nhà sản xuất người Mỹ, giáo sư Stephen Emmanuel làm về chiến tranh Việt Nam. Bộ phim được quay tại Việt Nam trong tháng 5 và tháng 6 năm 2007.
Bộ phim được đánh giá là có nội dung sâu sắc về hậu quả của cuộc chiến tranh tại Việt Nam và về những khó khăn trước đây trong tiến trình hòa giải giữa hai nước. Bộ phim tập trung vào bối cảnh hậu chiến và nỗ lực của các nhóm người Mỹ và Việt Nam tham gia hoạt động hàn gắn vết thương chiến tranh. Mời quý vị và các bạn cùng theo dõi.
Cười xa xăm cái ly em ở, cái ly chàng đi, thôi ta đành chờ đợi nhau, hứa thủy chung hai phương trời, chờ đợi nhau, hứa thủy chung chẳng rời nhau. Ai kêu mà ai hú, có người thương ai, có người kêu ai ở bâng khuâng, có người em gái ngỡ ngàng cái nhìn chim bay, cái cười xa xăm, cái ly em ở, cái ly chàng đi, thôi ta đành chờ đợi nhau, hứa thủy chung hai phương trời, chờ đợi nhau, hứa thủy chung chẳng rời nhau.
Even before the fall of Saigon in 1975, Vietnam had begun to recede from our consciousness. The country and its people had become synonymous with a disastrous war, a war we desperately wanted to forget. In the years that followed, feelings of grief, anger, and shame would prevent us from looking back, from seeing the human face of suffering in the wake of terrible violence. We could not face the truth about what happened there. Though more than 30 years have passed, the wounds of the war in Vietnam are still with us, as are the challenges of reconciliation. The Vietnamese prefer not to talk about that part of their history. They have not forgotten the war, but they choose not to dwell on it. A decade of steady economic growth has helped to replace the old pictures of death and destruction with new pictures of a bright and prosperous future. Yet the lingering consequences of the war are still felt here. American warplanes dropped a staggering 8 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, more than 3 times the tonnage dropped by all forces during the Second World War. The U.S. military also made unprecedented use of anti-personnel weapons, which were designed specifically to kill or maim as many people as possible. A single cluster bomb could scatter hundreds of exploding bomblets packed with deadly metal fragments. These weapons inflicted massive human casualties. The wreckage of B-52 bombers can still be seen around the city of Hanoi. They serve as an eerie reminder of what once happened here. Then there was the Chemical War. Between 1962 and 1971, nearly 19 million gallons of herbicide were sprayed with the express purpose of defoliating forests and destroying food crops. About 12 million of those gallons were the notorious Agent Orange, containing the deadly ingredient dioxin. U.S. forces also deployed nearly 400,000 tons of napalm, a flammable gel that was used to clear jungle and destroy villages. Later banned by a United Nations accord, Napalm caused some of the most horrific civilian casualties of the war. Kim Phuc, the girl in the picture, recalls the day her village was attacked.
Yes, I remember in June 8, 1972, the war came to my village. So actually we didn't know where we had to go. So we decided to hide in a temple with another villagers and the South Vietnamese soldiers. We hiding in that temple, and we thought that we'll be safe. But unfortunately, in the wartime, no place is saved. So when we're hiding in the temple for 3 days, then on the third day, when they dropped the napalm, so the evidence is, you can see I got burned so badly, and my aunt, she got burned as well, with her arms and with her hands and her leg. Then he lost 2 sons, 3 years old and 9 months. So of course a lot of soldiers died too. And the village was destroyed, most of the houses, and I didn't see that because I was in a hospital. But my mom and my dad say a lot of people wounded, and we have a lot of animals around, and of course they was killed all because of the bomb, different bomb, and a lot of tree they were cut. You know, my house was destroyed many times, like 4 or 5 times, because my mom and my dad rebuilt the house, then the war come again, and come over again, until 1975. We completely lost everything.
Millions of Vietnamese lost their lives in the war, and countless more were wounded. A large percentage of those victims were civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. But the consequences of the war would continue long after the fighting had ended. Tons of unexploded ordnance still remain in the earth, claiming more victims every year. Another lingering problem is the legacy of Agent Orange.
I first came here in the spring of 1984. At the time I was a journalist. I came here because by accident I had met a Vietnamese doctor in Europe who was working with Agent Orange victims in Vietnam. And so I got the visa and I came here with a cameraman to see for myself the long-term consequences of the herbicides that were used during the war. And I thought I had prepared myself, or we thought that we had prepared ourselves for what we were going to encounter in Vietnam at that time, but I tell you, no human being could really prepare himself for what we met at the Vietnamese hospitals, in the villages in the south, and also in the central highlands that had been heavily exposed to Agent Orange. The sheer volume of suffering, the number of people that were affected by Agent Orange was terrifying. One of the things I will never forget was 4-year-old Hoang Kim that I met in Tay Ninh province. That's the only time I've seen a human being who had no eyes. I mean, physically were born without eyes, but could still cry. She was dying from kidney failure when I met her, and you don't forget that. You don't, ever, ever. And also I remember very well the cancer wards of Trudeau Hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, where these girls were lying, 2-3 girls in a bed. Many of them in different stages of dying. And in a sense, it was much more sad and terrifying to be with these girls than it was when they took you down to the basement of Trudeau Hospital, which was a real horror show. I don't know if they still, maybe they still have it there. I mean, at that time, Dr. Phuong took me down to the basement where she, in big bottles like this, she had collected the most ugly and horrible examples of what dioxin apparently can do to an unborn baby. And I mean, it was horrible to look, but in a sense it was a lot worse to go 2 floors up and visit the patients that were still alive. From what I know, when it comes to the issue of Agent Orange, this is one of the areas where you will still encounter that legacy, and it is still frighteningly real. I think you can still visit quite a few hospitals and foster homes for orphans and so on, where they are still dealing with patients. I'm not a doctor or a biologist, but I think that the half-life of dioxin is frighteningly long. So I assume that the Vietnamese will have to deal with this for decades to come.
Large tracts of land and waterways are still contaminated by dioxin poisoning, which has been linked to a long list of illnesses and birth defects afflicting both Vietnamese and American veterans and their families. Yet, in the case of the Vietnamese, the U.S. government continues to deny any responsibility for these problems.
I tell you the truth, I pray for Vietnam every day in my life. I cried for them. That I know that how much they suffer after the war. Not only me, not only my family, not only my village, but a lot of people suffer.
The Vietnamese prefer not to talk about that part of their history. Then again, they have no need to talk about it. They live and breathe the legacy of war. Dawn breaks over the National Mall in Washington, D.C. For veterans of the war in Vietnam, the work of reconciliation began here in 1982 with the building of a wall to commemorate the sacrifice of Americans who died in Vietnam. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial speaks powerfully to the suffering of a nation. It does not glorify war. It is not a gleaming white monument to victory. Set below ground level, this wall of polished black granite, bearing 58,195 names, defines a space for visitors to contemplate the human cost of war. The wall is a place for reflection and healing. For some, this may mean reconciling with the loss of a friend or of a family member. For others, it may mean reconciling with a government that sent them to fight an unpopular war.
The wall is famous for eliciting a kind of reconciliation. People come to revisit the past that they had frequently tried to turn away from or forget. Others who were not part of the whole war effort, maybe the next generation, participate in this and come to understand better what it was like to have been there. This is very important. However, it's also limited in the ways it's purchased at the price of not confronting the moral essentials. One way to try to see this is that the memorial nowhere mentions those who were killed by us in Vietnam. And we are talking about millions of people. I don't even mention those who were maimed or those who continue to suffer because of what we did there. What about reconciliation with them? Do we owe them anything? These questions are absent entirely from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
I came back for the first time since the war, since my involvement in the war, which was 1965-66, in 2003. My guide interpreter, who was a 27-year-old Vietnamese man, didn't seem to have any anger or resentment at all towards Americans, and certainly I didn't feel it towards me at all. And the only time that he got a little bit testy with me was when I mentioned the Vietnam Wall in Washington and the 50-plus names, 1,000 names that are on that, and he quickly dismissed that and reminded me that there were over 2 million Vietnamese died during the war. And that was the only time that we didn't seem to be on the same page. That actually led to me looking a lot more deeply into that whole area of the total loss of the war. The Vietnam Wall has always been a special place for me to visit. I used to work in Washington, and I would go to the wall in the morning when it was quiet, and it seemed to be a very, I don't want to say spiritual, but a very, a place that evoked deep emotion. I wrote a poem about a question that a 12-year-old girl had asked me in 1965 or 66. And it was about my struggling with the question that she asked me of why we were in Vietnam. The poem originally had a line that I changed. And I changed it because the original poem referenced the Vietnam Wall. And even though the wall is part of it in terms of the origins of the poem, I realized that the loss, the suffering of the war was much greater than the 50-some thousand Americans that died. And I felt that I needed to change the poem and remove the reference to the wall. Originally, the poem said, meet me at the wall, I will hold you, and you will understand. And by saying, meet me at the wall, it focused on the tragedy, the American tragedy, and not the universal tragedy of that war. And so I changed it to, come to me, I will hold you, and you will understand.
Hỏi, anh lính thủy đánh bộ ơi, vì sao anh Marine, why are you in my country? Anh bảo em rằng anh đến đây. You tell me you are here to save me. Tuổi thơ em. I don't believe you. Em không thể tin anh. Marine, you are not listening to me. Anh chẳng nghe I don't hate you, and your eyes tell me you don't hate me. Em không phải Marine, why are you in my country? Anh lính thủy đánh bộ ơi. Open your eyes. What keeps my words from reaching your heart? Why did you kill me? Why did I kill you? You died before you knew me. You died before you understood. Come to me. Open your heart. I will hold you, and you will know me and understand. Em lớn mở ôm anh. Ta sẽ quen nhau và anh sẽ hiểu.
I, of course, went to Vietnam having grown up in the 50s and the early 60s and believing that Americans were always right, and if we were there, just by us being there, had to make it right. But she wasn't buying what I was selling, and yet I couldn't hear her. And it would be wonderful if she knew that her question had a profound impact on my life. But so anyway, I wrote the poem in part to honor her, to honor that question, and to honor the journey that I've been on.
In his poem, Mending Wall, Robert Frost reflects, "Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense." The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is a mending wall. But our suffering is still connected in a very deep way with the suffering of millions of Vietnamese who are not mentioned here. Though more than 30 years have passed, the wounds of the war are not healed. We have not made peace with Vietnam. Along the banks of the Perfume River in central Vietnam lies the city of Hue. During the Tet Offensive of 1968, this city was the site of one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. Both Hue and Quang Tri province to the north were targeted for extensive herbicidal spraying missions. Nearly 1 million gallons of Agent Orange were sprayed over Hue province alone. Some of Vietnam's poorest people live in the rural villages of this region.
Vietnam continues to be a very poor country. There is a lot of economic growth in the wealthy cities of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon in the south, but very little of that development is filtered into the countryside where the vast majority of the population lives. So it remains a very poor country. There continues to be a lack of funding for important medical care that is needed. The government provides very basic medical care, but does not provide sufficient funding to meet the needs of kids, for example, who have congenital heart defects, kids with neural tube defects. Visiting Vietnam and actually going into the countryside and seeing the conditions that these people are living in, the children in particular, children with disabilities in particular. We don't have that kind of suffering in the United States, and with all that we do have, there's a great need for us to do more to help give something back to that country that we caused so much destruction and suffering in during the Vietnam War.
The Office for Genetic Counseling and Disabled Children, located at Hue Medical College, was established in 1999 to serve sick and disabled children in central Vietnam. The OGCDC, as it is more commonly known, is directed by Dr. Nguyen Viet Nhung. Much of Dr. Nhung's work is funded by American nonprofit organizations and private individuals whose humanitarian efforts are an important part of the reconciliation process.
You know about the relationships between the exposure to Agent Orange in the wartime and the birth defect and other kinds of disease. I only focus in the birth defect. But in the research of the NAS, National Academy Science, maybe in your country, is had a lot of the research to find out the relationships between exposing to Agent Orange and some kinds of the cancer, some kinds of the disease, and some kinds of birth defect. In the birth defect, there is one kind of defect, it's a narrative defect. There is some psychiatric evidence to the relationship between the exposure to Agent Orange and the narrative defect in their baby. So, but what's happened for my country, not easy, you know. In my research, I compare between the recent word spray and the recent word not spray Asian Orient in word Thai and compare some kinds of common defect. I think maybe it's related to the exposure to Asian Orient, but it's only suggest. If you need more evidence, you need more research. You need some more research, that means you need some more money. I have no money. So I don't know what's happened, but I believe that sometimes it's happened based on the research of the American scientists. We cannot wait. We should do earlier and better. For who? I think it's better for all disabled children. Because in this group, some children caused by Asian Orient, maybe, but some by other cause. All disabled children, if they're poor, they need to have before too late. It's the moral. We never differentiate victim or not a victim of Asian Orient in our work because it's the moral problem. All of them need to have before too late. And the relationship between the exposure to Asian Orient and birth defect is the work of the scientists. Please work. My work, try to find a solution for the disabled children.
The OGCDC periodically sponsors free public clinics, like this one in Hongshi, where they conduct medical screenings for children. In addition to providing routine examinations and vaccinations, these clinics are part of the OGCDC's effort to identify children with disabilities as early as possible. That was the case for Nguyen, whose Down syndrome was detected when he was still an infant. Early diagnosis and follow-up care are essential for a child in Nguyen's situation. Children with Down syndrome are susceptible to a host of other medical problems, including congenital heart defects, cataracts, an increased risk of infection, and even childhood leukemia. Though Nguyen shows no signs of heart problems, he has already undergone cataract surgery, and his mother complains that he is frequently sick.
The baby with Down syndrome always facing with the infectious disease, and sometimes a leukemia in the future, no one now. The system of immunology is very weak when comparing to the other normal children. So with the policy of our government, now it's okay when the children under 6 years old, they can come here to get the medicine, antibiotic when he has the infectious disease.
Beyond diagnosis and medical treatment, there are other challenges that lie on the horizon for Nguyen.
Next step, first thing, she needs a special education. How to care for himself, how to have the family, how to respect everybody first. It's very important. And when the 16 years old, 14 years old, 15 years, 16 years old, we think of the job training for him. And now it's only focused in the how to help him develop some skill very important for him to live independent in the future. The most important with her family is what happened when they die. How about this child at that time? Con tin được không?
Bây giờ chứ cũng muốn bác ra chương trình để giúp đỡ cho cháu để đào tạo cháu có biết hơn.
So hope that with our help we can make this child better in the future. So this is the dream.
The OGCDC has begun to address the problem of meeting special education needs by developing a program called the Future School. There are currently no accommodations for learning disabled children in Vietnam's national education system, which lacks the necessary funding and expertise. Yet the need for these resources is great. In addition to equipping students with basic life skills, the future school is also a training site for special education teachers. By all measures, the OGCDC has created a successful model for a self-contained special education classroom. The future school model has been used to create satellite programs in the remote villages of Hue province. Here in the mountains of Nam Dong district, the OGCDC serves a small Katu community. The Katu are one of many ethnic minority groups that live in areas with severely limited access to transportation, education, and health services. These communities are among the poorest of the poor in Vietnam. Hope Shop, a collaboration between the OGCDC and the Spiral Foundation of California, was established in 2003. The mission of Hope Shop is to provide vocational training for young adults with hearing and speech impairments. In this program, the students are trained in sewing and traditional weaving techniques, which they use to create products made from recycled materials. Hope Shop is a self-sustaining program. Products made here are sold in a small shop on the premises and on the Spiral Foundation website. Profits from Hope Shop are used to support another major OGCDC initiative, the Heart Surgery Program. There is a high incidence of congenital heart defects among children in central Vietnam. So far, Hope Shop proceeds have helped over 100 children receive operations. Hundreds more have been helped through the generosity of international nonprofit organizations, as well as a host of private individuals who support the work of the OGCDC.
My work with Dr. Nhan at Hue Medical College, motivated initially by an experience while I was having a discussion with Dr. Nhan. A father came in, a worker from the fields, carrying his son in his arms, a frail little boy. Very skinny, nails blue, cyanotic heart defect, so his body wasn't getting enough oxygen. The father had tears in his eyes, begging Dr. Nhan for some support for the surgery his son needed, surgery that would save his life. Without that surgery, he was going to have to take his son back to the countryside because they just couldn't afford the $600 that open heart surgery would cost at that point.
This new cardiovascular center, located in Hue City, was built in 2007 with funding from an American humanitarian foundation called East Meets West. Only a year earlier, all the surgeries were done in a single operating room in the old wing of the hospital. The new facility has 4 well-equipped operating rooms and performs an average of 18 heart surgeries per week. But even at this rate, the backlog of patients waiting for surgeries continues to rise.
Of course, besides the fund from the Spiral Foundation, we try to raise more fund from the other sponsor, because a lot of the children need the help. They come from all central Vietnam, not only in Hue. And they born with the heart defect. They have no money for operation. They must wait. And next year will be more the children, newborn baby with heart defect, same problem. And next 2 years we'll have more. Because they have no money to pay for hospital, they must be waiting. They wait from this year to that year, and make the number of the children with heart defect day by day more and more.
Two, an OGCDC case officer visits the families of prospective heart surgery patients to assess their economic situation. Finding a family can sometimes be a challenge, as there are no formal addresses in these rural areas.
So the village is very far, and we must walk about 3 kilometers. We can't go by car.
In the sweltering heat and humidity of the summer day, Tu sets out on a 2-mile hike to the village where the family lives. In order to do the most with their limited resources, the OGCDC asks families to contribute whatever they can for the operations. Most are able to contribute between 10 and 30% of the total cost by borrowing money from relatives and neighbors or by selling off non-essential assets. Dr. Young believes that the poor people of his country must never become dependent on the government or charity to solve all their problems. He practices a Vietnamese version of what we might call a hand up, not a hand out. Still, there are many destitute families that cannot afford to contribute anything toward a surgery. In these cases, the OGCDC does not hesitate to cover 100% of the cost, including transportation. There is usually no doubt about which families fall into this category, as we discovered in a follow-up visit to check on a patient whose recovery had been slower than expected.
They try to make loan from the government, $12 million to build this house. But unfortunately, after the sixth great typhoon last year, so it's blow away. Yes. And this is the neighbor's store. Before her neighbor sell cafe, but now she live away from it, and she permits her to live in this.
The OGCDC takes great pains to make its work as transparent as possible to Western donors. Detailed dossiers are compiled for each patient. These contain photographs, information about the child's health history and diagnosis, a complete profile of the family and their financial need, and a report on the outcome of the surgery. Donors are supplied with a copy of the dossier for each child they help. Some families in the heart surgery program have more than one child in need of care.
6 months ago, when he have difficulty in breathing and very hard, you usually get fever, and the mother took him to the hospital for examination. And the doctor found out his heart defect and suggested that he must be operated as soon as possible. But you know, last year, his sister also had a heart operation, and it's cost them a lot of money. So it's very hard for them to have enough money for the child operation, because their coming is only just from farming work and high labor, but it's not much, hardly enough for the family food. So the teacher of future school introduced him to our office, so we can take note of the family situation and can have a surgery as soon as possible. He was operated 1 month ago, and now he can get better health and can play with other children.
In my work, you see, I have seen a lot of the misfortune life. This is the reason why I choose to do something for the other. Maybe you think like that. My friend Professor Alan think like that. And we think about my life. I believe I have a too much. I look too happy when I compare with everybody or the other, and I should do something to share it. I think it's all. It looks simple. Yeah.
There are many obstacles to reconciliation with Vietnam: lingering bitterness and denial, politics, bureaucracy, and mistrust, to name just a few. Individuals like Dr. Young are crucial links in the healing process. He takes no side, lays no blame, rises above petty politics, and confronts bureaucracy with determined patience. He makes the wheels turn, and he does it all for the sake of the children. Hue is also a traditional center of Buddhist life in Vietnam. One of the city's cultural landmarks is Tu Hu Pagoda, which was established in the mid-19th century. In 1942, a 16-year-old by the name of Nyat Hanh was ordained as a Zen Buddhist monk here. Nearly a quarter-century later, during the American War in Vietnam, his work for peace and reconciliation would inspire the movement known as Engaged Buddhism. For more than 4 decades, Thich Nhat Hanh has taught one consistent message, that the work of transforming suffering in the world must always begin in ourselves, with the practice of mindfulness.
I think the practice of healing should begin with oneself. The practice of reconciliation also. If one does not have the capacity to heal oneself, then one cannot help heal the other person. A group of people. It's not only the intention, the willingness to reconcile, but the capacity to reconcile. But you have to reconcile with yourself first. Suffering is, of course, in the other person, in the other side, but suffering is there in our own side, in our own person. So the true practice is to go home to ourselves in order to have a chance to recognize the suffering, the unskillfulness we have committed into the past. And that will bring about insight, transformation and healing. And based on that, the healing and the reconciliation with the other party will become possible. Suffering is also something positive, because you can learn a lot from suffering. And understanding suffering can be very healing. If you don't understand your own suffering, you might continue your own way with other parties, with other partners, and you continue to produce suffering for yourself and the other partner. So while you still follow the old pattern with another partner, like Iraq, like Iran, you have not learned anything from Vietnam. And if you still continue your that kind of pattern in other parts of the world, you cannot reconcile with Vietnam, because you have not reconciled with yourself.
Have you made your own peace with Vietnam?
No. My torture was that at no point, and you know, there's been a lot of people in this circle who at some point said, no, I'm not doing this shit anymore, this is crazy. I never said that. I never did anything about the atrocities I saw. I never did anything about the war crimes I saw. I stayed there and I did whatever they told me to do for the most part. I cut out of what I could get out. And so that's what I carry. That I never said, I ain't doing it. Because I knew it was wrong. So have I made that peace? No. Do I carry any anger or animosity for the Vietnamese? I never did.
Psychologically, I had massive nightmares. I came home, I couldn't do anything. My head was so screwed up, it was ridiculous. Well, just bombs going off. A multitude of things were going crazy. I had some situations that I'm not proud of at all as far as me doing things. It's just, I just learned to live with that. I became a major drinker. And if I look back, obviously, if I knew what the hell I was doing, I wouldn't have gone to Vietnam. Because I regret some of the things. I regret virtually everything I did over there. But the fact of the matter is that I've screwed up. Every vet I've met in the VA for the last year is screwed up. And we all need help. And a lot of poor guys living under the bridges right now because they're alcoholics need help. And we have to take care of our own before we take care of somebody else. That's all I'm saying. I totally agree with him. But we've got so many guys in this country that have never worked a day in their life because they're screwed up. At least I worked 30 years. And we have to take care of our own before we take care of the Vietnamese. And if our own people are being taken care of, then I'm 100% behind helping the people from Vietnam. But we're not being taken care of. So that's it.
One of the things that's part of the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition at retreats is there's a veterans group within the retreats. The ones that have had the greatest suffering weren't suffering based on their wounds, but what they carried with them in terms of what they did. A very dear friend died last year. He actually died of complications from one of the cancers related to Agent Orange. But he finally, at one of our retreats, was able to open up and talk, and the pain and the suffering that he experienced, not only because he took a life, but the adrenaline that he felt, which is part of war, which is part of what you need to do to survive in war. But he carried that guilt with him, and one of the things he said is that that he wouldn't be free from this until he died. Now, I think fortunately he had gotten to a point before he died and reconciled some of the emotion that he carried by what he had done during the war. And so it's not so much about forgetting the war, but it is very much about creating a new future by really living in the present moment in a way that really supports where we want to go and doesn't simply repeat where we've been. And so many veterans, both of the Vietnam War and now the Iraq War, are carrying the past into the present moment. And if the present moment determines the future, then what they're doing is simply taking the past into the present, and then that becomes their future. And so the mindfulness practice is not about forgetting, but it's about paying deep attention in the present moment to what we're feeling so that we have a chance to create a different future.
So it comes down to the perspective that we are not trapped in the past unless we choose to be, and we can come to now, and hopefully make not just peace with Vietnam, but just peace for everyone, peace for everyone, peace for the planet. Vietnam deserves peace, but doesn't everyone? Doesn't everyone?
To be a compassionate winner is easy, but can you be a compassionate loser?
they won, and we've never forgiven them. We will never forgive them for winning.
In America, the wounds of the war are not healed. Certainly when we look at what Washington is doing, we're creating other Vietnams all over the world.
So we may be having the same discussion in Iraq 30 years from now when people say, well, when are we going to finally clean up the destruction that occurred in Iraq? I hope not, but so far our record is not very good.
And the truth is, nobody wins a war. It's hard to say they won because nobody wins a war. You may stop a war, but everybody loses. For me to come back to Vietnam is all about reconciliation and about what I call meeting the enemy. And when I talk about meeting the enemy, there's two enemies. That's the enemy inside of me and the enemy I fought against. And I think the enemy I really met was the one inside of me. And that's the one I've made peace and reconciliation with. And that's the one that was necessary.
For our veterans, they were engaged in behavior, which is killing. That's what war is. Right? You're doing it either directly or indirectly. And we're taught not to kill in every religious teaching. So you're engaging as a very young person in a behavior that's directly opposite to the earliest things you're taught as a child. That conflict stays, and it gets very deep. And then as you get older and you have your own children, all of these things haunt. When U.S., in my experience, when U.S. veterans return here and when Vietnamese Americans and from other nationalities return here, a lot of that trauma drops off because the images they're carrying and the emotions stop wherever the trauma happened. So 1970, 1969, wherever the emotions stop. And it gets crystallized, but when they come back, all of that's replaced by new imagery, and it drops away. So what's left in the memories and the pain, what's real, but it doesn't control in the same way, and it allows people to open out and be healed. So you still have the scar. And you still have the pain, but it's not twisted. It's not a twisted pain, and that's what reconciliation is. You don't try and get rid of the pain. You can't get rid of the handicap. You can assuage it.
The turmoil is all over the board for thousands of veterans over the years, and many have struggled successfully to overcome the problems that were rooted in their experience in Vietnam during the war. And for some, the last step in that process is to come back to Vietnam, and I've witnessed it a number of times where the experience might range from mild pleasure, oh, this is a nice place, I didn't quite imagine it like this, to the other extreme where there's just a complete catharsis, I mean just a breakdown, where guys who were helicopter machine gunners, or who were various, had a lot of different roles in terrible situations in the army or the military. Big hulking guys the size of linebackers, will break down and weep, while a little scrawny Vietnamese veteran is patting him on the back and saying, "It's okay, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. You did your duty. We understand. We're brothers. It's over. It's finished." And for so many of these guys, it's like 30 years of this overwhelming burden that they've carried. All of that is just sort of lifted from the encounters they have with Vietnamese veterans here. So all the Vietnamese people, they genuinely share that idea. It's not something that they could make up. I mean, a nation of 80 million people can't get together and decide this is going to be our line. It's just that they feel it, and they share that with us, and it's a very it's a humbling experience, but it's also inspiring, and it's a lesson that's been valuable for me. I mean, it's a lesson that I really will treasure for the rest of my life.
I was in Vietnam in 1968 with 3rd Marines fighting over here. And it occurred to me after I returned to the USA, I knew nothing about Vietnam. So after 25, 26 years, whatever it was, I decided it was time to come back and meet the Vietnamese as a people and not as an enemy. My first day in Saigon, I'm sitting in my hotel room, and I thought, it's time. I have got to walk outside. I came here to be here. It's time to walk outside. So I talked myself into walking around the block one time and just see what it felt like to be back on Vietnamese soil. And I did. I was walking around the block, and it's a true story. This man stopped me, and he says, in broken English, "How long you been in Vietnam?" I said, today. He says, "Oh," he says, "you've been in Vietnam before." And I thought, well, yeah, that's why I'm here. I said, yes, 1968. I said, I was with U.S. Marines. And he pointed his finger at me and said, "You're the enemy." And my heart just almost dropped. And I said, "Yeah, I'm the enemy." And he put his arms around me and gave me a big hug, and he said, "Welcome to Vietnam." I thought, wow. So from that point on, I as a human being changed, and I was no longer afraid to be here. I had my moments when I went back to where I did combat. I went back to Quang Chi. I had my moments, but that fear was gone from that time. And that's what happens to veterans. You can go back. You can find healing. You can find peace again. I never want to forget I was in Vietnam. I don't want it to dominate who I am as a human being. And by coming back, meeting the people, and opening my heart, then it changes me as a human being and makes my life better.
Jones got involved in the work of Friendship Village, a residential program in Hanoi that provides care for children designated as victims of Agent Orange. In the words of its late founder, Vietnam veteran George Mizo, Friendship Village was established to cultivate reconciliation and heal the wounds of the Vietnam War. In the same spirit, other veterans have returned to Vietnam to engage in the work of making peace. Chuck Searcy was stationed near Saigon during the war. He now lives in Hanoi, where he coordinates a major project to clean up unexploded ordnance in Quang Chi province.
Up until the year 2000, VVMF, Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, was focused only on the mission of maintaining the memorial itself and sustaining the programs and the activities, commemorations, and events surrounding the memorial. But in a delegation visit during that year, 2000, about 20 or 21 members of the board of directors and the corporate council, which supports the memorial fund. On that visit to Vietnam, the veterans in that group decided that they wanted to do something for Vietnam beyond just the wall itself. And so out of that came the project in Quang Tri province, which is known as Project Renew, to help clean up the bombs and the mines and artillery shells and mortar rounds and grenades and all of the other ordnance left after the war. The problem in Vietnam of unexploded ordnance is probably much greater than most Americans would ever imagine. In fact, most people are surprised to find that there still is a problem 35 years after the war ended. Since 1975, at the end of the war, through 1998, about 35,000 people have been killed and about 65,000 people injured by unexploded bombs and mines, accidents during peacetime. So that's more than 100,000, and that's a conservative estimate. It's, we don't know the exact total number, but it would be far higher than that. In Quang Tri province, where we work, the accidents continue, although we hope, partly because of the project there, the number of accidents has decreased, the number of children and adults being killed and injured has gone down. So there is some progress. But the only real security in assuring people's safety is to clean up the debris and get it safely destroyed so that a child is not going to step on a cluster bomb, or a farmer is not going to hit a bomb with his plow or with his hoe. So we don't know how much is left. The Vietnamese estimate several 100,000 tons still remaining in the ground and under the ground and on top of the ground. But we are continuing the work, we and other organizations and the Vietnamese army, to clean it up. And with enough resources, with enough money, and with the right application of skills and expertise, which the Vietnamese have, they know how to do this, and they know how to do it right, and they know how to do it safely. With adequate resources, we could clean up the problem in Vietnam in another decade and say that this country is now safe. But without the resources needed, then it's going to go on for hundreds of years into the future, and we don't know when the last casualty may occur from a bomb that was dropped in 1972 or 1973 or 1975, just days before the peace came to Vietnam.
Project Renew also provides vocational training opportunities and financial assistance for the victims of UXO accidents.
We started the vocational training for 25 blind people who are the victim of landmine. The training is running for almost 2 months, and we intended to train them 3 months so that they can have a job, earn money by themselves, and help them to reintegrate into the community. This is a room made by blind people. It's really beautiful. Yeah, and they can sell it out for $12,000. It's almost $1 US.
Many UXO accidents result from ordinary farming activities, such as plowing fields. But some people risk their lives scavenging for the scrap metal from these bombs, which they can sell for 10 cents a pound. That was the case for this woman's family in Dong Ha. While she and her son survived the explosion with serious injuries, her husband was killed on the spot. Project Renew now helps her family with a low-interest microloan.
She's got the loan of $3 million, just around 180 US dollar to raising pig, so that they can, after a month, they can sell the pig and take the money and pay for the loan back after 2 years or 3 years. Yeah. I would like to show you the pig. Yeah.
Because the highest concentrations of bombs are found in the poorest rural areas of the country, 85% of UXO victims live either at or below the poverty line. Microloans help many of these families rebuild their lives more quickly than they could ever do on their own. Another veteran, Ken Herman, returned to Vietnam 10 years ago. He set up an NGO that provides direct aid to communities in Da Nang and nearby Quang Nam province, the area where he was stationed during the war. The work is carried out by American college students who participate in a service learning program based in upstate New York. Today, the group will deliver a shipment of much-needed supplies to the people of Hoa Gan leper colony outside Da Nang City.
Hello. Hello. What's your name?
My name Nook.
Nook? My name's Ken. Ken.
How are you?
The problems often with those who come to help are not that they're not caring, it's that they come from a humanitarian orientation, a charity orientation, with a certain arrogance that always goes with that. When I was a kid in South Buffalo, my father belonged to a charitable group that every Thanksgiving would distribute baskets to people. And then he would return home and feel good about what he did. And it even made me question when I was 10 and 11 and 12 years old whether he was giving them food on Thanksgiving to meet their needs or to make himself feel good. And I think that's part of the difficulty in involving people in the kind of work that we do in direct aid, and part of the difficulty in generating support for what we do. We don't build hospitals, and we don't build schools, and we don't build buildings on which people can place their names. We build lives.
The colony was established in 1960 and today is home to about 300 lepers and their immediate family members. Herman's group makes periodic deliveries here of essential items such as cooking oil and noodles, as well as medicines for the clinic.
Giỏ rồi lấy là được đâu. Đừng trứng. Tính ca.
In this community, students discover that direct aid means directly confronting the reality of human suffering and the alarming inequities in the world that deprive some people of even the most basic forms of medical care.
If I'm a humanitarian, then I give people charity. And I expect something in return, at least feelings of goodwill and a tax deduction. If I'm a humanist, then it's a question of being able to move into the lives of other people, to feel the honor of being able to experience not only their smiles, but their pain. The important word, I think, the operational term for those who want to do this kind of work is empathy. Not caring, not understanding, but empathy. Do they have the ability, or are they willing to develop the skill of moving inside the skin of other people to feel what the Vietnamese feel, to smell what they smell, to taste what they taste, to think the way they think. If they're able and willing to do that, then indeed they can effect change. A failure to do that prohibits anybody from effecting change. In 2001, we were asked by a woman at the Da Nang Red Cross if we would begin to provide services to those who were victims of America's use of dioxin during the war. America sprayed and dumped 20 million gallons of the deadliest chemical known to mankind on this country during the war. The Vietnamese estimate 3 to 4 million victims are still in this country, a large percentage of them children. So off I went with this worker from Da Nang Red Cross on the back of her motorbike into the rural hamlets and into the mountain and met people. And while I knew it was a problem, because I'm a Vietnam veteran, and there are all kinds of Americans who are Vietnam veterans who suffer as a result of Agent Orange, and their children too. But it was peculiar. It struck me as odd that the U.S. government didn't recognize that there were victims in Vietnam of the same problems with the same source that they were compensating in America. Number one.
A major focus of Herman's work is providing direct assistance to families with sick and disabled children. Many of the children he supports suffer from conditions that are linked to Agent Orange.
Oh, you're going to go to sleep? A little boy, fat, 2-year-old boy, dealing with hydrocephalus and hyperthyroidism and a variety of other physical disorders, including a serious case of pneumonia that we took to the hospital in Da Nang just the other day, is teetering on the brink of death at this point, as of this morning. No one knows. This baby's sick. He's got a fever. He's not breathing. He should go today. Can they get him there today, or should we help them get him there? Let's go to the hospital. Off to the hospital. Go to the hospital. You have a fever, baby. Okay? If people get involved in helping people like Little Fat to make themselves feel good, they probably will not get involved at all. It's not a question of humanitarianism, it's a question of humanism. Is one philosophically oriented to the point where that person understands they have no option? That we live for the purpose of helping Fat. We have a responsibility not just for folks down the street, but for the world community. And if we think we don't have that responsibility, I think we don't understand where our clothes are made and where our food is processed and who makes our cars nowadays. It's one world, and it's quite simple. At least it is to me.
It is spring in Vietnam, a time of regeneration and renewal. For the young who have no memories of war, spring holds the promise of a new beginning. As the poet reminds us, spring is also a time for mending, a time when neighbors meet to survey the walls that stand between them, and make common cause to repair the damage of the preceding winter.
We are the world, you know. We are the world. So I hope that with the internet, with the development of the transportation, maybe look like a no border between the countries. I hope for the young, the people can sit together, can work together. We are all generation maybe. But I hope the next generation, my daughter for example, no border between them. They respect together, they respect environment.
I honestly, I don't think that the United States or its citizens need to hope for full reconciliation, because on the Vietnamese side, it's there. Seen from a Vietnamese perspective, they have left the American war behind. I do not doubt that for 1 minute. If there's any kind of reconciliation left to be done, it needs to be done on the American side.
When you come over here, you have a lot of fear in your heart and soul. But after you meet the people, you realize that the Vietnamese are able to separate me from the war, and they don't blame me.
I never meet Vietnamese who expresses any kind of animosity or let alone hatred or anger or anything on Americans. They don't blame the American people for what happened here.
It's just part of their whole being to somehow find harmony and conciliation and to forgive. They don't forget because they honor the memory of those who came before and who sacrificed, and they recognize the pain and the suffering that everyone experienced, and they greatly respect that and honor it. So they don't forget, but they certainly do forgive, and they have forgiven us.
I would say to the U.S. about the Vietnamese, offer them the best you have. Not because you feel sorry for them, not because you think you owe something to them because of the war, but because these immensely resourceful, smart and energetic people, they will get the best out of it. I mean, it is no coincidence these days that Vietnam has become the darling of the international donor community, because they can all send success stories at home to their taxpayers. I mean, assistance to Vietnam pays off.
But I found that what really was of even more benefit than money was the building of a relationship, showing that you cared. Americans actually going out, albeit young Americans, into hamlets that had never met an American since the war, expressing their concern, spending time with families, sometimes helping them in terms of building homes, taking kids to hospitals when they're sick, sometimes being able to provide them with food and education, some medical care, and cooperating with other groups.
Those are the kinds of things that we can do that break the stereotypes. It breaks the stereotypes within our minds that we've been raised with. And we were all raised with them. They were raised with them and we were raised with them. And we're all raised with rhetoric that sounds in our head that's usually not true. Right? And you begin to break that apart once you know people. And once you know people, it becomes much harder to fall for the initial steps that lead to wars. You realize when you're being fed political stuff that's not true, you're not so likely to fight against your friends and your colleagues when you have those relationships. And that's what we can build now. And the Vietnamese are very keen to do that.
Real peace between the U.S. and Vietnam would be a complete absence of any kind of suspicion or lingering doubts and accusations even about the war, the blame for the war, and the consequences of the war, and who is responsible for dealing with those consequences. I have my opinions about that and my views, and I think the U.S. Still needs to do more. And I think if we did more, we could come much closer to that kind of equity in attitude where everybody would feel that some level of fairness had been achieved. That's the part of the formula that's been missing so far in all of our dealings with Vietnam, and we may never achieve it, but it's a goal that we should aspire to, I think. And I have a lot of American friends and other international friends in Vietnam who I'm proud to say have made a contribution toward that goal. So in small ways, that may be occurring on a daily basis. It would be nice if it could occur on a much larger and comprehensive basis where the people of both of our countries, the U.S. and Vietnam, could finally sort of stand back with some satisfaction and say, the war is ended.
Dòng người gọi tôi nghe tiếng rất nhu mì, lòng thân bình yên mà sao buồn thế, dần mình nhìn tôi ngồi hát bao giờ. Rồi một lần kia khăn gói đi xa, tưởng rằng được quên, thương nhớ nơi quê nhà. Lòng thân bình yên mà sao buồn thế, dần mình nhìn tôi ngồi khóc bao giờ. Đường nào quạnh hiu tôi đã đi qua, đường về cạnh tôi có nắng rất là đà. Đường thầm lặng yên lòng không gì nhớ, dần mình nhìn quân ô phố xa lạ. Đường nào dìu tôi đi đến cơn say, một lần nằm mơ tôi thấy tôi qua đời. Dù thân lệ rơi lòng không buồn mấy, dần mình tỉnh ra ô nắng lên rồi.